Sean. Here we go. All right. Hey, everybody. Thank you guys so much for hopping on and joining me. Today, we're going to be, continuing our conversation around effective data storytelling. We're on chapter 7 this week, so really excited about getting into the heart and the meat of the subject matter here. This has got some amazing topics that we're going to be going over. I can't wait to hear what everyone has to say about this stuff. So let's not. Alliance is counting on you. Like, subscribe, leave a comment down below, turn on that alarm bell so you don't miss any future mission. All right. Hey, everybody. Thank you guys so much for joining. Welcome. It's so good to see you guys all here today. This week in chapter 7, we're talking about setting the scenes of your data story. How do we bring that all together? How do we get that up and going? There is a little discussion guide that we may turn over to if, we don't have enough things and items that we're talking about. We'll hop over here to have questions and whatnot. But with this crew, I doubt we'll end up having to go to that. As always, we're going to hop right over to, just first thing first, what was your favorite thing about this chapter? What was your observation from reading this? I'm going to kick off mine, but then we'll turn over to you guys, and I can't wait to hear your feedback on it. The number one thing that I found was, or I guess I've known this, but it really kind of solidified this concept, or I just had a new awakening on this, and this is the Anscombe's quartet of how you look at statistical information, and the 4 different views necessary to look at that information to properly tell a story. So that kind of tells me, like, okay, hey, we may have one way that we look at information and that, we consume and we think about, stuff, but we need to be looking at, and we need to be consciously looking at even the same information from different vantage points, getting different people's views, different takes on it, because, what I see is only ever going to be through my eyes, right? It's only going to be from my perspective with my background and my knowledge. I need the Belindas, I need the Jessicas, I need the Seans and Davids, Kevins. I need all of you guys to be part of this conversation, and to hear what you have to say when you look at the information, because that different perspective adds richness and flavor to what we're looking at here. And we need to create environments that encourage our users and people out there to be doing the same thing, to be looking at data in different ways and engaging with other people about the conversation of data. This is my favorite piece. How about you guys?
Well, I have one. I have to say, I thought, oh no, Chris is going to take mine. But obviously, Mr. Enterprise Chris took something really geeky and statistical, where SMB Belinda is going to just focus on a concept, but in one word context, a re-emphasis on context. That was something that really hit home to me, and I think something that we need to share a little more frequently with people as they're building out visualizations, because I heard a quote one time, like, if someone says life is hard, your response should be compared to what? And they said actually something very similar in the book, like, revenues are good compared to what? I don't know, right? It's like this, don't look at just some number and figure out, hey, this is what we're looking at, because if revenues are going up, but the number of customers you have are going down, that changes your whole business focus. Just the opposite is true, which is what they had in the book. Revenues were going up, but the number of net new customers was gradually decreasing, and there you have it in the picture. So context is everything. So that's one of my insights. I'll stop there so that other people can chat.
Linda, this is Mike. You took mine. So
Oh, did I?
way to go.
Well, Mike, I think because we're in the same mindset, Mike.
Yeah, I think you're right. But you're
I'm
smarter than I
sorry
am.
for that too. I apologize that we've been friends so long that I've rubbed off on you, but go ahead.
No, it's good. No, but I think just to add to that, I think context is key. I think another one for me, just to pick something else, was to make it easier for your audience to make comparisons, between charts. It kind of goes with context, I guess, a little bit, but just making it as easy as possible for your audience to pick up on what you're trying to show. Labeling is also important, just to make sure you kind of call out things that you want them specifically to get out of what you're showing them. So those are the couple of things that jumped out at me. It was the context and just making it easier to make comparisons between things.
And, Mike, I was thinking the same thing. Sorry, Chris, didn't mean to jump in on, you were probably going to say something. That was one of the things I was thinking, oh, I have more. We'll talk about that later, because I think we have a tendency, because Power BI is so cool, to like overload the page with coolness.
Yeah.
But maybe based on what we're reading, a way the eye sees things, maybe that is the complete opposite of what we should do. If we're talking about revenue, especially revenue compared to the number of customers we have, maybe we should just have different variations of the same visual all side by side so that you could just focus on that.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Mike.
No, you go, David. You're up.
Oh, well, I mean, yeah, that is indeed an excellent observation, that we're data geeks or data geeky at a minimum. And it's like, oh, more data. I want more data. Give me, but let's see if we can get, 12 graphs on this page instead of 10. And and then there's just a certain amount any person's brain can absorb, even if we put it in a visual fashion. If we want to really pull out and drive home this one thing, like the example you gave, the number of new customers is on the decline, even though our revenue is going up. Pull out that one thing. And even if that means, okay, I've got to take the visual that I've already built that says a lot more than that, and copy it and trim it down so that I can drive home that one message, then do that. I just deliverables in general. My experience over the years as a consultant is I spend so much time in the analysis and building things up that when it gets, oh no, I'm almost out of budget, and just kind of slap together a presentation or something. And really, we ought to allow more time than that, because delivering the message is so crucial. We shouldn't cut ourselves short on that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and before we hit on everyone else's favorites, Belinda, I owe you a check from last week. Mike, I think I owe you a check this week, because this is the visual that I thought that jumped out of me as to an example of what we could do when it comes to creating a report, and a number of different mixtures of things that we could look at adding in, right? And so inside of Power BI, I went and I said, you know what, let's recreate what we had inside of that visual, right? But using our AdventureWorks data set. So we've got our gear, or our bikes, our components, and our clothing. If we look, there's a number of different things that we could do to make this accessible to our readers. First being, oh, I didn't maintain blue. Okay. First being, we consistent coloring. Second thing being that we leverage icons to help ground people into what they're seeing, right? So like, instead of just saying bikes, we've got a little, a bike for that. So we can bring that symbol in and bring that visual connection to it, to what you're looking at. But then when it comes to visualizing, grouping like with like, right? So if we're talking bikes, group bikes over years, then look at components, then look at clothing. Because even if you line these up together inside of one chart, they're so radically different. The amount of sales that you see between bikes, components, and clothing, that it's really hard to see that, you know what? Look at these huge jumps that we've had between these, 2020, 2021, and 2022 in components and clothing, right? There are these huge jumps up relative to their, market space. So I just thought that was very interesting.
I would
Plus,
change the icon
It's really
colors
good.
to match the color they represent too.
ooh, that is really brilliant, Belinda. That is a great idea. Yeah, and frankly, so to come up with this, you don't have icons inside of Power BI, so I just did inside of PowerPoint, right?
There
So
you
I create
go.
all my elements in here. Now it would be relatively easy for me to take a snapshot of what I got over here, whatever colors I'm going to do, stick it over into PowerPoint, and then match those icon colors up. Oh, that's a good idea, Belinda.
I think every now and then.
You
Well,
think all the time. That's a good
I,
one.
I do also like it because it forced me to go in and, in order to create the visual that he had over here, where it showed not just the values, but the change that you want to like hone in on. It forced me to actually go and write some DAX because I didn't have that in my model, right? So I had to go in and create okay, well, I need to create a variable for previous year, right? So calculate that out. I had to, look up again, same period last year, how you format that, right? And then make sure that my calculation of my sales amount minus the previous year amount divided the previous year, right? Made sure that that was accurately bringing that stuff forward. So I don't know. I found that one to be this little bit right here to be something that was a fun exercise for me to do as part of this book. So, Mike,
And
thank you very
that's an
much.
easy
Really good.
to consume page, your
Yeah.
report that you showed. And it's giving the viewer the opportunity to really just focus in on comparisons of just year sales and the category sales, and letting everything else, just focus on that right now. And this could enable them to find their own aha moment.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
True,
Yeah.
true. Yeah, and and I'm sure probably everybody's noticed so far in the book, his visuals are really pretty straightforward, but extremely effective,
Mm-hmm.
which to
Well,
me
he said
drives
he
home
said
the
he
point.
built them all in Excel.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
okay.
Yep. With a little help from PowerPoint.
Yeah, yeah. Still
Yeah.
love Excel. Yeah, yeah. I love Power BI,
That's
but I still
why
love Excel too.
That's why before we got started, Chris made the comment, and Jessica wisely stopped us and said, save it for live. He made the comment that we needed some we're missing some visuals in the Power BI space. And I said, well, and that's when she stopped us. But my thought was, to David's point, I think the simplicity of some of those very basic elements add real value. And like the controversial pie chart, most data analysts will groan when somebody says they want one, but in the case of three separate categories, and if you have no way of having a negative number, then I think it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
As long as
I
it's
agree
not
with that.
as long as it's not three-dimensional. You have to say those if you're doing an analytics for politicians.
All right. Well, David, while we have you off mute, what was your favorite part of this chapter?
Well, I don't know where it shows up in Kindle, but in the book, page 204, the 5 common types of comparisons, which is frankly something similar
Yep.
to my thinking in the past. I always think in terms of who, what, when, where, why, and how, and try to frame things up in that context.
Yep.
So, and again, it's, little short list, but it reminds me of, okay, some triggers, if you will. some
Yeah.
questions that I ought to be asking or ought to be thinking about when I'm looking at data.
When I saw those, I immediately thought dimension tables.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are you thinking, Chris? I see the head bob going,
The
I don't
landing
know about
value
that,
is a
Belinda.
fact table, but you'd want to see them across different dimensions in any subject, right? And back to our, we had, I think we've kind of gone back and forth in these conversations around like having similar to like a code review, doing an analytics review where you say, okay, hey, on this report, am I covering all of these different things? And to me, it makes sense. Like, are you covering your totals? Probably, right? That's the first thing everyone does, right? Are you doing percent change? A lot of people forget that one, right? Like they're not tracking, what they're, maybe they got growth, but they don't have the change there, right? Tracking that, making sure that that's relative is important, right?
Yeah.
Doing a metric ratio, right? On the one that you were talking about, Belinda, where we're seeing that our sales was increasing, but our new client count was dropping, right? To me, that jumped. What's my ratio of clients to salespeople, right? And what's that been like over time, right?
Or what's the average invoice price? How has that changed over time?
Yep. Do we need to, do we need to contact HR and see about what's our recruiting ratio, right? Are we not keeping up with hiring salespeople, right? Because salespeople takes an onboarding time, right? There's X number of months or years before you get a good salesperson up to speed. How soon do we have to be in on that curve when we do that, right? But as you look at each one of these, there's all sorts of different like added context and variance and changes that come along with it that I was thinking, boy, it'd be good to have those conversations when you look at any report, and not in a negative way. Just ask yourself, do I need to have any of these, or should I have any of these? If not visible, maybe something that you could drill into, something that you could, see. Honestly, I was talking with some guys on the Power BI team. I said, it would be awesome if I created a visual that had totals, and on that visual itself, I could just rotate it like Vanna White, and like, okay, show me the percent change. Okay, show me the ratio, right? Like to be able to just naturally go through that, I thought that would be awesome. But
Wheel of data.
yes, yeah.
Yeah. You brought up a good one, Chris, on like it's on page 211 where it says do the math for your audience, which it basically says, if you're going to talk about change, then do the math, show the percent change. So instead of just showing just the variant, like the dollar variance, basically.
Mike, we're on the same headspace. I had already pulled up that page. I was going to have Chris go there because I love seeing these two visuals side by side. Yep. Look how effective the visual on the right is in showing the change from year over year as opposed to the screen on the left.
Yeah.
And that was going to be mine, really, was the variance, right? How do I set up the people that are going to be putting together the story or to tell the story? How do I set them up with these softball pitches to get them set to where they can present easily and easily show the story, right?
Yep. That's really good.
Yeah, mine was a little well, first of all, everything, of course, that you guys said, but that exercise where he has you looking at the two pie charts and figuring out what's the flaw. And I did not notice that. And what that brought out to me is that, I'm not primarily a numbers person. So, his whole commentary about check and recheck. Because, if you, let's say you're really focused on the visual, you may not see the math. You may not see the problem. And for me, that was a real, well, first of all, it was reassuring because it told me that lots of people have that problem. But secondly, to really reinforce with myself and my students, make sure these numbers add up. Like, just do the common sense, So, I mean, you're so focused on you know, the color and the visual and the this and the that. But at the end of the day, make sure that the numbers actually make sense.
Yeah. I can't find it. Yeah. Awesome. Sean, what was your favorite part of this chapter?
Yeah, so you guys all brought up a lot of good points. Mine was kind of a combination of a lot of them, which is really this idea that, yeah, we've looked at a lot of these different visuals that very clearly, they're almost telling a story without you necessarily having to say all of the words. And that's something that I kind of want to hone in on, is what actual like hoops is your brain jumping through when you're doing a lot of this? And how do you take whatever circuitous route that is, if you're whatever, like going around or this, that, and how do you make it a straight line, right?
Yeah.
How do you make the path of least resistance the one that everyone is going to follow, right? How do you just make it so easy to take a look at one of these visuals and draw insight? So I really liked the ideas of, I think there was the section with emphasis, and there were also the Gestalt principles, which show how do you differentiate those key things that you want to be showing from everything else. And so whether that be having things grouped together, or particularly, I like the ones with the contrast where it was taking one item and making it red and everything else black, or taking one thing and slightly tilting it on an axis where everything else is properly oriented, and all of these different things, because it's not even, you don't have to look through and guess to say, oh, I wonder what's different about this thing. It's blatantly obvious. So how do you make it blatantly obvious what the insight is?
It's really good.
This was actually the screenshot of this that I sent over to some guys at Microsoft. I'm like, I can't do this easily today just inside of Power BI, but I can do this with our new with the new PowerPoint injection. Be able to create a rotation, or be able to focus in, or have a size item applied. You can start to do those things inside of PowerPoint, right? Like, you can apply masking. It's not dynamic, right? So the story, like end to end, we should have our computers and our systems and our tooling should do that for us. But until that day's there, we now have those capabilities in many ways, right? Like the demo I showed last week. Oh, I don't have it. Oh, here. Nope, that's not it. Well, where we embedded and I highlighted those groups. So I just put boxes with the transparency layer over a scatter plot. Well, that's huge, right? Like that gives you that ability to like call in and do that, both the enclosure as well as a color out on a visual, right? So, even if our tools don't natively do that stuff, we can start to combine them together. And I always think of it as like analytics algebra, right? How do you combine these tools and capabilities to get there? Oh, great. Great item, Sean. I really like that one. Yes.
Yeah. And just to add to that, Sean, I think, the idea of producing a visual that people can understand if it sits on its own. So if you're not there presenting it to them, walking them through, how it's supposed to work, what this means, if you can produce something and send it to them, or, they're looking at it and they understand it without commentary, then that's success, right? So.
And on to Sean's point, there I had another aha moment in there, and this was a close second to the word context, but where you place the visual in relation to other visuals can alter the story to somebody or destroy the story. So you want to make sure that the placement is around things that relate and make sense. Otherwise, it's something that could get missed by the report consumer.
Yeah, I completely agree. Elijah, welcome.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. How you doing?
Good. So, thinking about visuals and a lot of the work that I've done recently, I've considered color very strongly in the design of the visuals and also kind of design of my pages.
Yeah.
So to give an example of like the page design, so if you take the layout that you made, you know, with the bike icons and the boxes and everything, so just by changing that color from blue to red, you'll completely change how somebody comes into that report, their really kind of emotional response,
Yep.
you know, and what that signifies. And you know, I kind of learned that with developing how my page looks, but then also with my visual colors, you know, using color very deliberately, only to show what I want to, right? You know,
Yeah.
like everyone has said before, to guide people to that insight that you want to guide them to.
No, I think that makes good sense. And honestly, you know, if you look at this, like red is considered a real negative color, right? Like, you know, that does not look, you know, I mean, really compare where this looks like now to what it was before, right? It looked like there was something really negative going on right here, even though we saw similar year-over-year growth, you know, with for our sales here, right? So, yeah, that was that's very, very insightful. Yeah, I like that. I also like the let me get you guys back up. Your comments, Sean, and but also on the color side fits, I think, into this the 7 essential principles for better visual storytelling, right? The having the setup, but then having the polish here, where you remove noise, focus attention, make it approachable, and install trust. Well, I think having that, you know, to Elijah, your point, having that right color in place, and you know, and making sure that, you know, we've removed the other stuff around it, that removes the noise, the right color focuses the attention, and then makes it, you know, visually something that someone can get to and approach. Yeah.
Yeah. I personally, I love color, and I was making some visuals with just a lot of color to it, and it was just too much noise for people, and I had to dial it back and be very deliberate with, you know, what those colors were signifying.
Yeah, that the whole color conversation is really interesting to me, because when I used to teach PowerPoint and now when I teach Power BI, I tell people, you know, don't go down the rabbit hole of color. Like, if you can find your color standards, usually going to be, you know, in your PowerPoint standard template deck, you know, start with those, and then, you know, stick to whatever has been established as a standard. And because otherwise what you'll end up with is just, you know, crayon soup, you know, up on your reports, and
a kaleidoscope.
yeah. And it's like, do you remember, some of you probably do, when they first came out in Outlook with email signatures and stationery, and everybody had different backgrounds, and then everybody had their own little signature with their own little inspirational quote at the bottom, you know, and what, which had nothing to do with work. And, you know, it was just very distracting. And, you know, and when they streamlined that, and when they streamlined the PowerPoint stand, you know, to come up with template decks, I think that that's part of the noise that we need to reduce. And I think that that's also true in Power BI. Like, we need to say, if you're trying to, a company needs to say, if you're trying to indicate a negative number, do this, you know, and stay within our palette, our branding, because otherwise, every time someone opens something from one report to another, it could lead them to automatically jump to different conclusions because of the different use of color and stuff.
Yeah, I agree. I'm, in fact, specifically though, what is your take on these two charts? So we have one chart where it is a color gradient, where we've got blues, shades of blue, and then we've got another one that is much broader in its color separation. Even in the text, he said, "Oh, well, the blues really didn't do it for me." He switched over to those to colors to get a separation from it. What are the bounds?
Well, he says,
yeah,
but he says in the text that those are meeting two different purposes. Like if you're trying to compare them all across all the products, all the categories, the monochrome use of the same blue in different hues is more effective. If you're trying to compare different category, products within to themselves, then you use the. But I think that color palette right there is too rainbow. It even on the right side, it needs to be less rainbow. And I think he even talks about that.
I agree. One thing I'll add to that, Jessica, is that so I'm colorblind, so I can see fairly. I mean, I can see, right? But I can't see very well when it comes to like different colors, especially when they're kind of put together like that. So I would just say the use of color is important, but make sure your color palette works for people that don't see colors that well.
Oh my God, wait, I have to rant for 1 second. Sorry, I have to rant. When I teach people, Power BI report creation, I say to them, if you're interested in, making your reports accessible, to people who, need a screen reader or a visual reader or whatever, or a colorblind, I said, the answer is not just to put high contrast and call it good. Like there's a whole art to this. And like, you should not be choosing your color, even with the edit interactions feature, like they need to be careful what colors they're choosing for, if you're highlighting, because otherwise someone who has visual impairment or, colorblind difficulties, it may be the contrast may not be enough for them to be able to pick up the difference. So I think that's
1 in 11 men are colorblind, and whether we like it or not, most of the readers are probably going to be men. So we need to account for that. And so I like to run a screenshot of all my reports through a colorblind simulator. They're online. It's easy to do and free.
I've never heard of such a thing. That's amazing.
Yeah,
if you just look up
and there's
colorblind
there's
simulator.
Also a screen reader. Yeah.
You could just upload
there's also a screen reader tool. Yep.
You could upload a picture and it will show you what it looks like under all the different colorblind scenarios. But back to your question, the practical person in me wants to like the blue on the left, but the reality is because there are only 3 different categories, so it works okay, but those 2 bottom colors are pretty darn close, even for someone who's not colorblind. On the right, it is a little bit in your face, but there are 5 categories over there, so it does differentiate those better. So I would agree with Jessica, that's too rainbow, but the more you're going to have, I think you're going monochromatic is not going to be an option. So again, context.
Yep.
Word of the day.
Yeah, it's not too much, not too little, right? Looking for just right. Where do we fit in the middle?
We got to be Goldilocks.
Well, and I don't think you want your data analysts, your people creating reports. I mean, again, I'm super direct with people when I teach, and I'm like, look, unless you're being paid as a graphic designer for your organization, you should not be spending hours and hours and hours down the color rabbit hole. You should get your standards from someone who has been paid and trained in this science and work with that. Don't reinvent the wheel. So I think my thing is companies should have standards. Yes, and then it would be a lot easier.
And every company should go ahead and build Power BI out for color blindness. So Mike, I appreciate you sharing that, because a lot of people don't, and some people don't even know they have it, to be quite honest. So, but it's a big deal. Tell me when we're off this topic, Goldilocks, because I want to talk about something else in just a second. Go ahead, David.
No, I was just going to make a personal observation, and this has been 25 years ago. I was working with somebody and didn't know that he was colorblind until I'd spent a whole lot of time putting something together in Excel with a lot of color coding, etc. And I mean, and I felt bad, that I not that I had spent the time, but that I didn't realize that what I was putting together just wasn't going to be that effective for him, because it was a tool that he was going to need to use every day. So I had to back up and, you know, spend some additional time. So
You were
you know,
all
it's
excited
real.
about your beautiful color-coded pie chart, and all he saw was a gray circle.
Well, yeah, yeah, kind of. Yeah, kind of. So, Mike, I don't want to put you on the spot, but like the example that Chris has on screen right now, the one on the right with the rainbow,
Yep.
I mean, is that effective for you or not?
For me, it doesn't work as well because it's too rainbowy. So the colors just kind of blend together.
Okay.
And it depends. Everyone has like a varying degree. If you're colorblind, you know, everyone is a little bit different. For me, the brighter colors blending with like different colors, it just blurs for me. So
okay,
that's the way it kind of works for me. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But Belinda, maybe after we're finished, if you could put on the YouTube comments a link to what you've referenced. I know I'm interested in checking that out with the
that reader, or
100%,
not the reader, but the check. That'd be great.
Yeah.
Hey, Belinda, put also the one where it's you can run the reader software over the entire report, and it will tell you, it will tell you what it's going to see if somebody uses a screen reader, because that's also a really useful tool.
Thanks, Jessica. That's a great idea.
You know what? Because I'll tell you, making a Power BI report accessible involves you have to change every single visual. It is a non-trivial work because you've got to put alt text in each visual. You've got to alter, the size of the fonts and all that for each visual. So yeah, the earlier you think about it, the better off you're going to be.
Yeah. Great point, Jessica. But like my illustration, if I had known in advance that what I was building was going to be used by someone that had that challenge, I would have approached it differently. Yeah.
An excellent point. A question for you, and for everyone here is, when they went through and talked about the different types of categories, comparison, trend, composition, relationship, distribution, spatial, and flow, in the book, they had a nice little chart that we can see here of different examples and different visuals for doing this. If you follow my channel, I have an entire, I think there's 20 some odd visuals that kind of are videos that outline how you can break these all up and how you can define these inside of like Power BI. Did these make sense to people? Were these were any of these new to you? Did they jump out as like, hey, I don't, some of these I don't agree with, or there's more that I'd like to use or see in here?
Yeah, I haven't used all these before, but I mean, I've seen them. And, some of these, I know this isn't specifically about a tool, but some of these you can do natively in Power BI and others you can't, right? So if you're wanting to use like a Sankey chart, for instance, well, you can use Charticulator or Deneb. So they're not as easy to create, but they're very effective, I think, if you use them the right way. I think the out of the box types of visuals that you get with Power BI are pretty standard, and effective as long as you're using them the right way. But some of the ones that are listed in the book here, depending on the tool you're using, are easier to create than others.
Yeah. Well, and with custom visuals, I think pretty much all of these, of the ones that are here, you can do inside of Power BI. I've had issues with the chord visual and making that and conveying information that made sense to users, right? There are times where it would make sense to leverage the cloud, word clouds. I don't know about those, but those kind of work. But I meant the chord visual down here. Often I've had issues where you could it becomes too jumbled, right? The number of pathways you can have inside there, the number of things you can see, it becomes really an issue in tracking that. How have you guys dealt with complexity around or training on some of these more complex, less straightforward visuals inside of your organizations or when you work with people? Have you found that you have to explain what a scatter plot is or how these things work?
Well, when you're training, you're already getting, like, if you're talking about the scatter plot, you're already talking about, we're going to be looking for outliers. And so let's do that. Let's take a look at it and let's see what happens to these outliers perhaps over time. So you're those are a little more specific. In training, because I only work with a few end users. I don't get into a lot of complex pieces very much. Like, I would never do a chord one for somebody. I tend to stay away from ribbon charts. I mean, because some of these visuals, like the tree, is just too much. I mean, the tree map, it's cool, but you have to have, it doesn't work with most data. It only works with a subset of data. The word cloud, I love it for its ability to read the text, but until we can do things like filter out, which you might be able to do, I just maybe haven't figured that out yet. Filter out words like the and for and things like that. You're losing a lot of potential value there.
Oh yeah, you can do that. Just FYI, stop words. You just have to put a list together and stop words. But yeah, but yeah, I think that the overall level of data literacy I'll just speak to our country, I think is a problem. I mean, and I think that should constrain you from using, wicked cool graphs that no one can. I mean, I'm not going to lie to you. I've looked at chord charts, and as the Judy Collins says, I've looked at chord charts from both sides now, and I do not understand them at all. Like,
it's all delusions.
Yes. So I agree. I think we need to have, before we introduce more complex graphs, we need to make sure that the audience who's reading it is going to get the benefit of the complexity.
Yeah, and Jessica, go ahead, David, because
I was just going to say the key word there was audience. You need to know your audience. Yeah. It's a different presentation if I'm speaking with the CEO of a company versus a frontline manager. And my expectation of what they're accustomed to seeing and what they're not accustomed to seeing. And some of these, like, for example, I like waterfall. And what I've always found is I've got to explain it like the first time that I present it. But after that, oh, okay, I see. It's, down is some kind of negative, up is some kind of positive. And once you explain it, that's fine. But yeah, chord, I can't explain that to someone, and expect it to stick. Unless someone has grown accustomed to using that chart kind of week in, week out on a regular basis. I can't imagine pulling it out of the toolbox.
Okay, so Jessica, go ahead, ask Chris, and then I'll go.
So I guess my thought was, and I'm going to piggyback on Jessica and some of the other comments about, like, how do we raise up the bar when it comes to our data literacy, is, do we combine more advanced visuals with basic visuals that illustrate the same thing? So you're seeing the same thing from a known vantage point as well as an unknown vantage point, so you can start to gain that over time. And while we ideally strive for an immediate understanding of what's going on with the data, what about a year from now? Don't we want our people to have a better, ability to understand data a year from now? I don't want to give up today, right? But let's not just focus in on today. Let's think about a year from now. Maybe we should be purposely, like, exposing people to some new visuals along with what they have, right? As a gradual learning curve, so that a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, we've been advancing our broad user base. I don't know. That was just a thought of mine
No,
as we were
I
talking
think
about
you're
that.
I think you're exactly right, because if your reports aren't changing, if it's not a living, breathing entity, if they're not changing, you might as well just print them out on paper and then call it a day. I mean, seriously, because it's
Yeah.
like, it's not, I mean, maybe you use some insight you got when you implemented it, Power BI being it, but if it's not changing, then you're not getting the value out of it you should be getting out of it. And I think as a beginner reports, they need to be very simple, basic reports that are out of the box, or visuals rather, that, and then let people grow. And there's always going to be new people coming in that need those basic ones, but there could be different levels of report that look at different things, because I think that we should enable our report consumers to be able to do a bit of their own research to find their own aha moments through the use of things like personalizations and Q&A. I'm a big advocate of both of those. So yes, totally. But Jessica brought up data literacy, and there's this whole section in this chapter talking about choosing the right data. And at the very beginning of the book, they're talking about let's see. So I'm going to read from page 200. As you'll discover later in this chapter, the ability to highlight certain elements within your data charts will be essential to tell it to an effective data story. So I'm going to bring up something that I keep bringing up, and this is mostly, and Kevin and Sean kind of wrote down the couple phrases they used while they did it. And Kevin used the phrase softball pitches, and Sean used the phrase blatantly obvious. And I want to share with the people on. David, I'm sorry, I can't remember if you were there Saturday or not. I don't think you were, but Chris and Mike and I think Mike was there. He doesn't come off camera a lot. We were doing an exercise in data storytelling, and I used real life crime data in New York City. And we were like, okay, let's find our aha. So we did a decomp tree, and immediately someone in the group says, this is racial bias. And so that made me think about bias in data altogether. How do we know that when we're creating our data story, we're focusing on the right thing that we need to be focusing on? How do we know that we're taking our report consumer down the right journey? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Or am I taking them down the journey that I think this needs to be? Because I kept thinking about the comment about that being racial. We decided to take that out of the factor, but whether you thought that it was the racial prejudice as being a bad thing, or if that was a good thing, which,
Yep.
I know, right?
That's-
Well, it's like our figures. I guess I should say it figures, right? There's some people like that who would say, "Oh, that's what I expected." You know what I'm saying?
You're right. I think
Yeah.
you're right.
So I mean, I agree. Yeah. So the question is, how do you tell that story, and what is the right way to guide people on the story? And so, I mean, a bigger approach to me would be and not trying to talk about race and race issues at all, but like if there is a group of people, let's say people who wear blue shirts, that get arrested more. So what's the story I'm telling about people in blue shirts? Do we just hate people who wear blue shirts? Sorry, Kevin and David, and me, I'm wearing a blue shirt today too. Do we hate people who wear blue shirts? Is that it? Or to
that point, yeah, it's how do you get to the neutral thing, right? And
yes,
growing up strongly Christian, there's a huge push, or there's a huge portion of Christians who can get really negative and down upon other people. And my mom has always said, hey, hate the sinner, love the sin, or hate the sin, love the sinner, right?
Mhm.
Like we should be out there looking at how we love people and work with them, but how do we help the thing that's bad, right? Like if we're seeing lots of assaults, right? How do we help out to stop assaults, right? Like what
Right.
are the things, like it doesn't matter who does an assault,
Right.
regardless of if you're wearing a blue shirt or not.
Right.
You don't do. We want to help that person not do an assault.
Right.
I think the
Yeah.
same thing is true in our business, though. When we look at, if you look at like reports on like salespeople, like people get super hyped up about really great salespeople, and then they get all down on bad salespeople. And honestly, I think reporting and analytics is a good way to potentially match up and line up people on who can help someone else, right? Like find a buddy who could help that lower skilled person in whatever the area is. Find someone who lines up with them and help them out. I always thought of
Well, that's the example I gave you is emotionally charged. So let me take out the emotional chargedness of it. So let's say I want to show, I have the sales department. I want to show that we need new computers for everybody. Okay, so I have that aha moment and I take them on a journey deliberately so that I could get the new computers for my department. I mean, that is shady at the very least, but I mean, how do we make sure that we're focusing on the right aha? How do we make sure that when people are taking them on the journey, we're making sure it's the right aha that we need to be focusing on? So this is
I take issue with your whole frame there of the right. I take issue in an intellectual way with this notion of the right aha, because it seems to me that, let's just go back to the example that you get, with the crime data. And it seems to me that the fundamental problem with, let's say, presenting, let's say, racial data or whatever, or demographic data, poverty levels, etc., with other data like crime reports and stuff like that, the fundamental problem comes in when you assume that correlation equals causation. That's to me, that gets back to data literacy, which is, okay, we see there is a correlation here, but that is not necessarily what is at the root cause. What we really need to be willing to do and we don't, we in this little talk group probably have these skills, but lots of people don't, which is, no. You need to investigate. Why is there this correlation? What is driving that correlation? And at that point, I think the right story is, let's see if we can find the root cause through this data analysis. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But
go ahead.
I think Belinda was pointing out, when we're doing the analysis, are we being, penny wise and pound foolish in targeting in on this one metric in a story, right? Like, is this the big thing where you want new computers, but really the organization needs to hire an additional salesperson or two, or we need some more people on the manufacturing line, or whatever it happens to be that you do. Belinda wants a new computer, so she made a great compelling case for her getting a good computer, but is that the best ROI for your organization? How do you know if it's the right metric? Is that where you're going?
Yeah, kind of, because we don't know what we don't know. And so we're looking for AI to guide us on, and the data, especially AI though, to guide us on something we didn't know that we need to research. And I totally agree with Jessica on that point. Because I was going based off of this book. So you find your aha moment and then you build your story to get to the aha. Well, if I am building a visualization out that kind of in the back of my mind, because this is human nature, helps support why my team needs all new computers. Oh, look, I have an aha. Yes, we have older computers than the manufacturing department, so therefore we deserve something new. And so yes, that's my case. So now I could start, there's my aha. So I'm going to start building my story around that. When the story really should be, if like, how effective is the sales department being, and what's within the sales department that could make them more effective? I mean, that might not be new computers. Belinda just might want more RAM, you know? And so that's the kind of thing that I'm putting at play, is to find the aha, so you could build a story. How do we make that playing? And it was interesting when you said neutral, Chris, because MK Matthias, he said, who wants to consume neutral stories? You have a message to convey. You are mostly not neutral. But yeah, that's my whole point, is who is not the I mean, how do we make sure that it's just not my bias leading me to the aha, and my lack of understanding, my lack of data literacy, which I love that phrase, Jessica, that is driving the story.
I think chapter 5 kind of helps with this, because you got me thinking, and I flipped back. So what you were talking about is confirmation bias is one thing.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing was correlation fallacy, where you basically said, hey, all blue shirts are blah, blah. So this chapter 5 kind of talks about those traps that you could fall into, and maybe some things that you could do to avoid them. And then you translate that into like, okay, now that I understand the traps, how to avoid them, how do I then kind of take that and tell the story with my visuals where I don't fall into those traps, basically.
And my apologies. Thank you, Mike. I'm going to go back and reread that chapter with this thought in mind. And my apologies for taking us down a rabbit hole.
I mean, it's a good point, because I'm going to have to go back and reread a lot of stuff in this book, because there's so much material. I'm not going to remember all of it.
Well, I'm just from my perspective, I think it's a daily personal battle that you have to fight. I mean, and I'm a CPA. If there's ever been a profession that is neutral, it's a CPA. Okay. And even if I detect, I've got a bias toward new computers, more RAM, etc. Okay. I have to watch that I don't pull back so far that I wind up in the other ditch.
Me too.
Yeah. And so, I mean, it's just a constant questioning of self. Okay.
David, we're just nice Southern people. That's why.
Well, I guess that's right. That's right. We say bless your heart a lot.
We do.
We can't say anything nice. Yeah. But yeah, it's a introspection issue more than a data or a data visualization issue.
And for Jessica and I, it's something we have to struggle with training people on doing. And then for those of you who are consultants like Chris and Sean and Mike and I think Elijah, I think everyone here. Yeah, we have to figure out how to instill that in our customers and
Absolutely. Yeah, unfortunately, I missed the meeting on Saturday that you referenced for the day. I have to go back and check it out. I was traveling. That's when I was mentioning I was traveling back through Carolina, and I thought of you, Belinda, when I was traveling back on Saturday.
I was getting ready to travel, and all these Teams notifications kept popping up on my phone. I had serious FOMO, I want you to know, because I wasn't there on Saturday, but I was getting all these.
It didn't get recorded, but I want us to tackle it again, because I thought it was really interesting how animated everyone got when we started looking at the data specifically and trying to figure out how do we start storytelling. And Chris, maybe that would be a fun little exercise after this chapter, do a final book club with a little piece of data.
Oh, there we go. We can keep this going into, a follow-up in a couple weeks in July and see what we learned and see if we could take something. Oh, that's a great idea.
We could all wear pool apparel because it'll be summertime.
There we are. Oh, that's awesome. Well, just for awareness sake, I'm trying hard to get Brent to join us for the last a book club. So in 2 weeks, fingers crossed, his schedule will clear up and he'll be able to hop on and join us and have a conversation with us. No promises. He's a very busy guy. And well, I have a budget of $0 and he normally charges for speaking. So fingers crossed we can get him to come on and join our book club and help and make some comments on this. But as always, it has been an absolute pleasure talking with each and every one of you. Next week, we'll be doing Chapter 8. Chapter 8 is, I didn't click on it.
Part 2, visuals.
Part 2 of visualizations. Yep, polishing the scenes, right? So just going to be doing more and more of that stuff. On Tuesday of next week, at 5 p.m. Central Time, I have a live stream that's going to be, I'm just announcing it right now, with Power on BI. Yep. So if you're interested on write back capabilities in Power BI, we're going to have another one. We had Acteris last week. We have Power on BI next week. So I'm excited about that. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Thank you all for joining us. You guys are great. Thank you guys very much. Have a great day. Peace.
Bye, guys. Bye,
Thank
bye,
you.
bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.